Tactical Cactupi. Chapter 21. The last class was dismissed into a perfect fall afternoon. Blue skies, cool temperatures, the subtlest of breezes. The sun seemed to rest upon a distant hilltop like a giant orange on a giant table. On the plaza, Mr. Curtin sat in his favorite spot, gazing off toward the bridge, reading a newspaper with a look of satisfaction, occasionally making a note in his journal. A few students had gathered at the edges of the plaza and in the rock garden, passing the time before supper. As always, they gave Mr. Curtin plenty of room. No one dared go near him while he was working, which is why so many jaws dropped when Reynard Muldoon was spotted walking toward him. Did the new kid not know any better? Was he just dying for a visit to the waiting room? No student had ever approached Mr. Curtin on the plaza before. Reynie guessed this, which is why his breath came so short. But keeping his shoulders squared and one hand behind his back, he did what no other student dared to do. He approached from the front, knowing he would have only one shot at this. His plan would be spoiled if Mr. Curtin turned his chair. "Mr. Curtin, sir?" Mr. Curtin glanced up, his lenses gleaming like polished chrome in the sun. "Sorry to bother you," Reynie said quickly. "But I couldn't help noticing that your book has a lot of dog-eared pages. I must say I was surprised." Mr. Curtin seemed unsure whether to be angry or incredulous. "You're surprised I have pages to which I often refer?" "Oh, no, sir. I'm surprised nobody has ever given you a suitable present." Reynie showed Mr. Curtin what he'd been holding behind his back, a fistful of thin blue ribbons. "Bookmarkers. I thought they should be special, so I asked a laundry helper for some sash material. I'm sure you recognize that shade of blue, which she cut into ribbons and sewed up nicely along the edges." Reynie held out the ribbons, which were indeed elegantly stitched. "I hope you like them." Mr. Curtin was taken aback. He was flattered, it was true, yet his expression clearly showed that he agreed with Reynie, that he rather thought someone should have given him such a present before now. It was a proper attention that had been lacking. "Thank you, Reynard," he said with a tight nod. An appropriate gift indeed, from one young scholar to his superior. "I shall put them to good use." Mr. Curtin returned to his newspaper. "Sir?" Reynie said. "Aren't you going to put them in?" Mr. Curtin grunted impatiently, his expression darkening. The boy was a nuisance. And yet the nuisance had flattered him, and the ribbons would be useful. His expression softened a little. Finally, he sighed and set aside his newspaper. Flipping his journal back to the first dog-eared page, he slipped a ribbon inside. He was beginning to turn the page when Reynie said, "What exactly is that book, sir?" Mr. Curtin paused. "It's a journal, Reynard. Every great thinker keeps a journal, you know." He returned to his bookmarking. "I must say, it's an awfully big journal." "What better place to record awfully big ideas, said Mr. Curtin, which was just what Reynie had thought he would say. "Now, Reynard, no more interruptions. I have a great deal of work to do." Mr. Curtin flipped to the next dog-eared page. "Sir? One last question?" "A very last question, Reynard," Mr. Curtin said, looking up. "Go ahead. Why are you always gazing off toward the bridge?" "Ah, I suppose it does appear that I'm looking at the bridge," Mr. Curtin said with a smile. "In fact, I'm gazing fondly toward one of my greatest accomplishments, the tidal turbines." "I trust you know about the turbines?" Reynie nodded. "I thought so, they're quite famous. They are an extraordinary invention, you see, and part of the great tradition." "The tradition, sir? Do you not recall my mentioning my homeland's admirable tradition?" "I was referring to the great conquest, the conquest of the sea. Holland claimed much of its land from the sea, you know. Dikes and polders, my boy. Nothing in the world less controllable than the sea, and yet the Dutch found a way to control it. And now, in my own way, I have done the very same thing. My turbines capture the ocean's infinite energy, which I use for my own purposes. Is it not remarkable? It's the most remarkable thing I've ever heard, Reynie said, equally impressed by Mr. Curtin's remarkable vanity. No doubt, said Mr. Curtin. He clapped his hands together. But enough delay. Even greater things lie ahead, Reynard, much greater things, and we must waste no time achieving them. He began paging through the rest of his journal, inserting the ribbons. Mr. Curtin was turning the pages with disheartening speed, but Reynie dared not interrupt again. Instead, he allowed himself one glance, and a brief one, at that, behind Mr. Curtin, toward the hill path leading up beyond the dormitory. A short distance from the bottom, the path curved around a large potted cactus. Nothing unusual about this. There were many such cactuses set along the institute paths, but this particular cactus seemed to have several arms. A cactopus, Reynie thought with an inward smile. There, said Mr. Curtin, holding up the journal, with the ends of ribbons sticking out here and there. Satisfied? Oh, yes, sir, said Reynie, though in truth he was disappointed. He could see many dog-eared pages remaining. He would have liked to bring more ribbons, but the timid helper had given him all the sash material she could spare. She'd been afraid to disappoint him, but terrified to give him more. You're quite welcome, Mr. Curtin replied, as if it were Reynie who'd been given the present and not himself. And now you may leave. This time Reynie needed no urging. He hurried off the plaza and across the rock garden, where several students gaped at him, surprised to see him still alive. He even seemed to be happy. Then Reynie reached the path and hurried uphill toward the cactopus. Constance stood high above on the hilltop, keeping a lookout, actually doing what she'd been asked to do, which was promising. Behind the cactus, Kate was on her hands and knees, and Sticky stood precariously on her back. He was peering through Kate's spyglass, which he had steadied atop a high cactus branch. Did he get anything? Reynie whispered to Kate, so as not to disturb Sticky. You don't have to whisper, Sticky said. I did get a little, and I'll get more if he'll just write anything. He's on a fresh page, but now he's gazing away again. Only a little? Reynie said. He was turning the pages pretty fast. Sorry, I tried to stall him as best I could. And I could only see a small part of each page, Sticky said. He glanced down at Reynie with an impish smile. But I do remember what I saw. Is it any good? Reynie asked. Beats me. I haven't had time to think about it. There's a difference between remembering and thinking, at least for me. He returned to the spyglass. Could you see us at all? Kate's forearms and your elbows, but you're pretty well hidden, Reynie said. Anyway, from below it's impossible to see what you're doing. What about from above? Sticky asked. Are we still clear in that direction? Reynie turned to check on Constance. It was good that he did. Constance was hurrying down the path toward them. For Constance, though, hurrying meant running a few steps and tripping, running a few steps more and stumbling. And walking about 20 yards behind her was Jackson. Jackson's coming. Reynie hissed. He was immediately knocked to the ground. Sticky, in his fright, had fallen off Kate's back and crashed onto Reynie. The spyglass flew out of Sticky's hand and onto the gravel path, and before the boys could gather themselves, Jackson had brushed past Constance, knocking her roughly to her knees, and was upon them. What's going on here? We were trying to make a human pyramid, Reynie said. A human pyramid? With 3 kids? Jackson said with a sneer. That's pathetic. And what's this? He had seen the spyglass and was bending to pick it up. Kate sprang forward and snatched it away. It's mine, that's what it is. Jackson stared at Kate, amazed a student had spoken to him that way. Then his amazement gave way to anger. You'll show it to me here, he said in a threatening voice, or else in the waiting room. It's your choice, Weatherall. Kate stared back at him, defiant. The others held their breath. Fine, Jackson said with a smile. He was beginning to enjoy himself. let me just tell you how this works. I'm about to grab your arm, and I intend to squeeze so hard it hurts, and escort you to the waiting room. If you try to run away or fight me, I'll personally see to it that you get kicked out of the institute, after you go to the waiting room. How does that sound? Kate had no choice. Reluctantly she held out the spyglass. As Jackson snatched it from her grasp, Sticky turned away, his face hidden in his hands. He couldn't bear to look. Jackson burst into laughter. A kaleidoscope? You risked going to the waiting room for a kaleidoscope? He put his eye to the lens. Yes, but it's my kaleidoscope, Kate said. Well, you can keep it, Jackson said in disgust. He handed Kate her spyglass back. This is the sorriest kaleidoscope I've ever seen. Reynie grimaced his way through study time, trying to ignore a broadcast that went on for 2 hours. After it ended, Reynie noticed Sticky was still grimacing. Sticky had spent all of study time reproducing what he'd seen in Mr. Curtin's journal and was still at his desk. What's the matter? Reynie asked him. Forget something? Sticky groaned. Forgetting isn't the problem. Art is the problem. He threw down his pencil. There was a diagram in there, but I can't draw worth a flip. Words and numbers, yes. Pictures? Hopeless. You can always try again, Reynie said, looking over Sticky's shoulder at the drawing. It seemed to depict a mound of spaghetti with numbered meatballs. We have a minute before lights out. It'll be easier if you don't have to use the flashlight. Flashlight or floodlight, it won't matter. I'd do just as well in the dark. This was my 4th try. It was supposed to be a diagram of Mr. Curtin's brain, with lots of numbers on every region. Reynie stared doubtfully at the picture. Are you sure it was Mr. Curtin's brain? It said MYBRAIN at the top of the page. Oh. Well, I don't suppose there was a key to those numbers, was there? Or an explanation of the diagram? Sticky shook his head. Not on that page. Reynie patted him on the back. Then don't worry about it. We don't need a diagram to know what a brain looks like. Sticky's face shone with relief. Really? Oh, I hoped you would say that. He tore the page into tiny bits. Reynie helped him shred the other attempted drawings, too, most of which resembled misshapen balls of yarn with numbered threads. They finished just as the girls made their appearance in the ceiling. Everyone was eager to begin. In no time the lights were off, and they were all seated in a circle on the floor. Okay, I have all the entries written down, said Sticky, showing them a thin stack of papers. They cover a lot of time. The first is from years ago, and the last was written today. Shall I read them aloud? The others agreed, and so, starting with the first entry, Sticky read. No one seems to realize how much we are driven by fear, the essential component of human personality. Everything else, from ambition to love to despair, derives in some way from this single powerful emotion. Must find the best way to make use of this. Well, that's cheery, Kate said. I'll bet Mr. Curtin's just a big scaredy cat, Constance said. So he thinks everyone else is, too. Sticky, who happened to consider himself a prime specimen of scaredy cat, moved on without comment. The next entry, he said, was dated a year later. Much to my disappointment, I have concluded there is no such thing as perfect control. I have come to understand, however, that the illusion of perfect control can amount to the same thing. He's all about illusions, Reynie reflected. The Institute's lack of rules is an illusion, not to mention its excellent reputation. And the emergency, too, the hidden messages make everything seem more hopeless and out of control than it really is. But then where is this illusion of control? I didn't see anything about that, Sticky replied. He glanced at his papers. The next few entries are all about using children as filters to keep the messages hidden. It's nothing we don't know. I'll skip them for now. I'm afraid the next part is a bit technical. Ready? The others said they were, though Constance squeezed her eyes shut as if expecting it to hurt, and Sticky continued. Brain sweeping a success. High power, close contact transmission works perfectly well as a forcible procedure. Retraining should also succeed. Contentment messages will 1. Counteract a brain-swept individual's tendency to question, and 2. Lessen the chronic mournfulness effect. Predicted side effects of retraining: timidity, anxiety, self-doubt. Conclusion: satisfactory. Constance put her hand on her head. Brain sweeping must be Mr. Curtin's term for destroying people's memories, Reynie said. If they're in his machine, I think that's what he means by close contact transmission, then he can brain sweep them against their will, which is what he means by forcible. That must be what happened to Milligan, except Milligan got away before Mr. Curtin could retrain him. But the other agents weren't so lucky, Sticky said. Mr. Curtin retrained them with contentment messages that tell them not to question anything. And to feel less sad, Kate said. But that part must not have worked so well. They all still suffer from that pesky, chronic mournfulness effect. There's more about it in the next entry, Sticky said. Long-term brain sweeping and retraining results mixed, helpers manageable but still dispirited. Worse, too frequent relapse of memory, often in association with trigger object. Typical episode begins with the last important thing remembered, names of significant persons, unfulfilled obligations, etc. Most irritating. Note: 2 of last 4 episodes occurred near mirrors. Reflection must be promoting self-identification. Solution: remove mirrors. Kate rubbed her hands together. Now I'm really starting to feel like a secret agent. We're figuring things out. What's next, Sticky? Sticky checked his papers. We're almost finished. The next entry explains why the special recruits aren't so sad. It's more or less what we thought. Can you just give it in a nutshell? Constance asked, then added, please? The others resisted looking at one another, and no one spoke. It was perhaps the first time Constance had ever used that word, and though she'd quite possibly said it by accident, no one wished to spoil the moment. If they mentioned it aloud, she might retract it. And so Sticky only nodded and gave the next entry in a nutshell. Remember when we talked about lacunar amnesia, or forgetting particular events? Apparently Mr. Curtin can use his machine to wipe out specific memories without taking away everything, without doing a complete brain sweep. It makes people dazed for a while, but then they get better, and the memories rarely come back. So if those recruiters had managed to kidnap us, Kate said, Mr. Curtin would have made sure we didn't remember it. That's why special recruits aren't scared. But because they weren't completely brain-swept, Reynie said, they aren't sad either. Which makes them better executive material. I'll bet most of the executives used to be special recruits. Maybe even all of them. After all, they had no families to return to on the mainland. I suppose that should make it harder for me to dislike them, Kate observed. Since they were kidnapped orphans and all. Everyone considered this for a minute. Then they looked at one another and shook their heads. They couldn't help it. They still disliked the executives. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to help them, Reynie pointed out. If Mr. Benedict can figure out how to bring their memories back, maybe they can start over, maybe they'll learn how not to be so nasty. I'm not holding my breath, Kate said. Sticky flipped a page. Guess what? The date of this next entry is the day we arrived on the island. We saw that. Kate said. We saw them working on the turbines. And we saw that truck the helpers were loading. Those crates, Reynie said. He slapped his forehead. I'm so stupid. It should have occurred to me. He looked at the others, feeling completely foolish. I'm sure you already know what I'm talking about. The others stared back at him, having no idea. I like that part about your being stupid, though, said Constance. Recruiters were driving that truck, remember? Reynie said. So it must have had something valuable in it, something Mr. Curtin wanted to protect. Why else would he need such security? Oh, yeah, I was just going to think of that, Kate said with a laugh. You're too hard on yourself, Reynie. But if I'd thought of it sooner, Reynie argued, Mr. Benedict might have been able to investigate. For all we know, the rest of the shipments have been sent out by now. We may never know what was in those crates. Maybe not, said Kate, but we can still report it, and we can keep an eye out ourselves. Right? True, Reynie admitted. He still felt like a dolt, but he preferred not to dwell on the feeling. Sticky, how many more entries do you have to read? 2, Sticky said. The next one was this. Success. As of this morning, the messages are transmitting directly. To my great satisfaction, the Whisperer is now capable of. That's it? Kate asked. Sorry, Sticky said. His hand was covering the rest. The Whisperer, Constance said. So that's what he calls his dumb machine. Reynie said nothing. He was wondering what new thing the Whisperer was capable of now. He knew one thing for sure. If Mr. Curtin was happy about it, then it spelled bad news. Sticky was preparing to read the last journal entry. This is where he seems to go completely bonkers. I can't make heads or tails of it. It's Curtin for you. Trust le drop the curtain. Curtin makes things better. Feel certain about Curtin. No, feel certain with Curtin. Curtin has control. Bizarre, said Kate. Is he talking to himself? Asked Constance. Sounds like he's trying to convince somebody of something, Reynie said. But who would that be? It just supports my personal opinion that he's a wacko, Kate said with a shrug. But wacko or not, he's awfully careful about keeping his secrets, which is why this has been so extremely, marvelously, wonderfully satisfying. Unable to sit still any longer, Kate leaped to her feet, pumped her arms in the air, and in a barely restrained whisper said, Can you believe we actually spied in Mr. Curtin's journal and got away with it? The sender himself. I say 3 cheers for us. 3 cheers for the Mysterious Benedict Society. Reynie and Sticky whispered 3 cheers, but Constance rolled her eyes and said cheering was for babies. I see you're back to being yourself, Kate said with a chuckle. But I'm not going to let it bother me. Constance scowled and started to reply, but Kate went right on talking. We're on a roll, everyone. We're really getting somewhere. I say we report all this to Mr. B, then tomorrow we take a peek at the loading area with my spyglass. Let's try to figure out what's in those crates. The others agreed, they sent their report, and 2 hours later Reynie was drifting away to sleep, having finished an upbeat mental letter to Miss Paramal and feeling hopeful for the first time in ages. Maybe, he thought, Mr. Benedict really could do something to stop Mr. Curtin. And then maybe he could help Mr. Bloomsburg and Milligan and everyone else get their memories back. It was possible, wasn't it? Reynie breathed deeply, stretched out, and let sleep overcome him. As dark as things seemed, at least they didn't seem entirely hopeless. The children were finally making some progress. Who knew what would happen tomorrow? Of course, Reynie could not know what would happen, and this was fortunate. For if he had known, he would never have slept so easily.